Clover, I'm so happy to talk to you today for She Can. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, it's lovely to be talking to you. It's a real privilege to be part of this conversation. My name is Clover Stroud, and I have been a journalist since my early 20s when I had my first child. And I started writing really as a way of being able to be at home with my son and be, working at the same time. And I really didn't know what I was doing. It was quite an unexpected pregnancy, but I started writing stories about my life, and I have had quite a lot of in my early 20s. I'm now 47, but at that time I still had quite a lot of kind of loss and life experience, and I started writing about that. And I was lucky that I was commissioned, multiple times by editors to continue writing about loss and grief and motherhood, and then shortly afterwards, single motherhood and marriage, divorce, alcoholism, not my own, but somebody else's, and the kind of, the stuff of the kind of grit and bones of life, I suppose. And since 2016, I've been writing memoirs. I feel, I wrote for all the newspapers for kind of 20 years, really, but I knew that I wanted to write a story about what had happened to me. And it's impossible to talk to you without telling you about my mum. And she was an incredible mother, very loving, amazing role model. But when I was in my mid-teens, she had an accident. She had a riding accident, and she was left in a coma for several months. And then when she woke up, she was profoundly brain damaged and profoundly damaged mentally and physically. And she required, very high level of nursing. And she lived in that state for 22 years. I find it impossible to talk about my life without kind of referring to that, because it was such a formative thing. I was 16, I was a young woman. It was as though someone pressed down on the button saying grief, death, trauma, and held onto it and didn't let go of it. And then she died in 2013 when I was in my late 30s. I'd had 4 of my 5 children at that point. And that experience of long-term grief and trauma really formed me. And it actually has really inspired me. And I think the fact that it went on and on and on and on for 22 years with a mother who was very, very, very ill, kind of like in a state of, as though she had, people say, what was she like? It was a bit like extreme Alzheimer's. She was like doubly incontinent, epileptic. She couldn't communicate at all. She couldn't walk. She couldn't talk. She wasn't in a coma. She had a kind of tiny level of consciousness, but it made me kind of, I think it made me go out harder at life and to go out after experiences and want to experience it all, and almost to defy this terrible kind of tragedy and trauma that was pushing at me all the time. It was there every single day in my life. And I did some exciting things. I took myself to dangerous places, and I had 5 children. I've had 2 marriages. I've kind of gone after the energy of life, I suppose. And I think it's really creatively, I think that traumatic experience has really creatively inspired me as well. And in the last 3 years, I've written 3 memoirs since 2016, which are all looking at the kind of challenge, the dark and the light of life, of how trauma and loss exist alongside joy and pleasure and beauty. And that's what I'm interested by.
I love it, Clover. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, you've answered already several questions in one go, which I'm so thankful for. Clover, you really are someone who lives life and you get into the nitty-gritty, it seems, in every moment, which is really an incredible gift. Tell us a little bit the journey of how you got to that. You told us about your life, but tell us a bit more in detail this emotional journey that got you to this place where you really are always searching for this. Is there something else? And it's as if you're shining a light at all times into every moment, which is an unbelievable thing to do in life, right? Because every moment leads to a day and leads to a week. And so with you, I have this feeling that you really when you talk to someone, you really talk to someone. There is no sort of, oh, just a little sort of, you
Yeah.
know, sort of nonchalant conversation. And I think that's very important. And I think all of us have to step up into this ring. It's as if you're sort of in this ring and you're just really shining the light at everything. How did you get there?
Yeah, I think it's really nice hearing that, and I think that I'm really interested in people. I'm really interested in the way life feels. I don't mean the way in life feels, when it's all working out, or if you've got loads of money, or if you're a celebrity. I want to know how you are feeling. I want to know how you got to the place where you are now. I want to know, what drove you to create the work you do, whether your relationship works, how you make it work, whether you chose to have children, whether you chose not to, whether you weren't able to. How has that kind of affected you and molded you? I don't have any I will share everything with you. And I suppose in conversation, that means that I ask very intimate questions. And sometimes that can you can find yourself kind of talking to someone. I mean, there are certain situations where I'm thinking about things like, and I wrote about this in my second book, which was about motherhood, and I wrote about going to baby groups and asking new mothers very, very intimate questions about their lives and what they'd experienced. And this was at the end of my first marriage, when I had split up with my first husband because of his addictions. And I would, ask them about whether they had witnessed domestic violence or whether there was any addictions they were dealing with. And sometimes you could see like a barrier coming up. For some people it is too much, but I think that people want, we want to share our stories, and the more that I talk about my story, the more I'm aware that other people want to be given, permission to talk about what motivates them, what hurts them, what excites them, what titillates them, what kind of inspires them. And I think the more that we do that, we're so, in this country, in England, we are so repressed. We're so scared of talking about the two big things that happen to absolutely all of us, which is sex and death. And those are two things that I love talking about because they are kind of at the heart of our existence. And we think of death as something that happens, at the end of our life, or somewhere off in a quiet room that we're not going to be witness to, I suppose. And I recently my sister died in 2019, and my latest book, which came out earlier this year, called The Red of My Blood, was about placing myself right up against her death and experiencing the grief of losing her and how to survive that. So I think because life has thrown a lot of stuff at me, a lot of loss at me, and also I have created a lot of abundance. I've chosen to have 5 children, which is a very beautiful but also incredibly demanding. We've spoken about this for sometimes it can crush you at the same time as well. It's very, very hard. So I think that the combination of the events of my life and the way that I've reacted to them have given me a kind of real appetite for that truth. And I do find it beautiful the way that the more true and the more honest you are, the more true and more honest the person you're speaking to will be as well. And that kind of exchange, and what turns not into just an exchange, but an actually a proper communication, a proper connection, is something that is incredibly important to me. The most important thing, really.
Clover, thank you for sharing that. And when I look at you and I read your books, I have this feeling that you are in every moment looking at what it means to really be a woman and what does it mean to be completely feminine. And you explore that in all your topics. And that's with grief, that's being a mother, that's being, having had the two important women in your life being taken away from you. I mean, do you feel you're almost a warrior for women now?
Yeah, I love that phrase. I love that phrase. I love the idea of being a warrior. I think kind of being a radical truth teller, because what surprises me is how the way that people react to my honesty. And if you have read my books, or if you on my Instagram or in conversation with me, whether you know me kind of intimately as a friend or sort of publicly via my writing, you will know a lot about me because I hold nothing back at all. And I love the idea that that is kind of empowering for women as well. I think it is. I think with the book that I wrote about motherhood, a lot of people have contacted me and said, this has just liberated me so much to feel all the things I need to feel around motherhood, which can be very beautiful and can be very, very dark as well. And to know that other people are feeling that and experiencing it is just such a relief. And you've freed me. And in freeing me, I can enjoy it a bit more as well. And I've done, I hope, the same with grief with my most recent book as well. And so yes, I love the idea that, and what a kind of privilege it is to be able to be in that position. I know that I feel life, I have an aptitude for feeling and communicating the way life feels and the difficult stuff of it, and also the stuff of everyday life, the trauma, the loss, the beauty, the light, the marriage falling apart, the sexual disgust or sexual appetites, motherhood, the anxieties about our work, is all stuff that we are all experiencing all the time. And so all the stuff that I say, yes, it's kind of radically honest, but it's not actually anything that you're not experiencing too. And I think the more that we can share it, the more we can help people in this weird experience of being human beings, which can be so bewildering and scary at times, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Clover, what do you think is your superpower? What do you think you're so good at this storytelling, at this incredible embodiment of truth and authenticity as a woman in the world who's lived through a lot at an early age? What do you think is that superpower you have?
It's a really good question. I think it's probably communication, a desire to communicate that stuff and that kind of radical honesty. I think that is what fires me. That's what inspires me. That's what I bring to my work. That's what I bring to my relationship with my children, with my husband, with my friends. It's what I'm always sort of reaching for when I'm writing as well. And it really informs my creativity too. As I get older, I mean, I'm 47 now, I find creativity is growing, and I'm excited by this next, I'm going into the kind of next phase of my life. I'm not going to have any more children. I've gone through my 20s and 30s. I've got a slightly stronger sense of who I am. What happens next? I'm really, really excited. And there's such a kind of narrative around this bit of midlife being a time of, a woman's power, or power really, dampening down. I really want to bust through that, because I look at women around me, women like you, so many women who are completely disproving that, who are, smashing that to pieces. And I think that that's a really exciting thing that we can do right now. And there does seem to be a movement happening which is saying, yeah, we are, we are utterly valuable, more valuable. And all the stuff that we've been through, we may have changed bodies, whatever, that's it, that's kind of irrelevant compared to the wisdom and the experience that we carry. So I'm excited by that. And I suppose, so with that comes the idea of the communication, and honesty is, I think, my superpower.
Definitely, 100%. Clover, what is in store for you? What are your plans and dreams for your future? You've written these beautiful books. What are you working on? What are your next things?
So I've signed to write another 3 books. So I'm writing several more books over the next few years, and I know what those books are about. Those are all kind of lined up. I don't know exactly what will be at the heart of the second and third, but I'm working on the first one at the moment. I also have been very struck in the last few months, whilst doing live events around the red of my blood, is how much people want to talk. And I would love to kind of develop more, and maybe this is like a post-pandemic thing as well, where we have been so isolated from one another and talking via screens, the desire to be in rooms with other women and men and actually have conversations. If there is some way that I can connect more in person, do more kind of live speaking, I think that would be something that I would love to do. That I think it could be really, really incredible. So alongside the writing, alongside being a mum to my 5 kids, I want to be able to talk to more people in real life and hear their stories and share my story.
I love that, Clover. And I can see you. I can see you filling halls and standing out there and telling your truth. And I think that's incredibly important, especially in this phase that we're in post-pandemic, where women have been hit disproportionately harder. And this just, really bringing this truth telling to the forefront so everyone can be authentic and find that power within each woman to do that and to be just who you are. And I think that's really important, and I think you do that incredibly well. Now, one thing we haven't really touched upon, which I'd love to sneak in another question, is this: you made grief your expertise in a way because you had to face it several times. I'm wondering, Clover, is there? I mean, I'd love to understand. Is there sort of a map? I mean, there's, I've read books and there are several steps, etc. What are these steps for you?
That's such an interesting question, and that is why I wrote the most recent book. My sister had died in 2019. She'd had breast cancer, but she died very, very suddenly. And I was flung into a place where I felt completely bewildered and completely furious and completely miserable and completely bereft. And I felt as though the life that I'd worked really hard to create, was totally broken and over. And I couldn't imagine ever being happy again. And I cast around for books to read. And there are kind of, well-known texts like Joan Didion, A Year of Magical Thinking, C.S. Lewis. There's certain poetry to read, but I couldn't read it. I couldn't find anything which would show me what I was going through, would describe what I was going through, and might help me to understand where the place I was being taken to. And so I wrote that book, The Red of My Blood, in the first year after Nell had died. And I mean, the only thing about grief that we can know is that it will happen to all of us. It will absolutely happen to all of us, but also that all of our paths are kind of unique, the way that we go through it, the way that we survive it. But I do think that there is a moment of creativity at the heart of grief as well, when you for a long time after the person dies, you kind of stretch backwards and you want your old life back. You want to be alive on this world with that person who has died. You want them to be here, and irrationally you kind of think you can get back there in some way. You can change fate, you can change the cancer treatment, you can stop the accident happening, you can push the old age a bit further away to give you a few more years. There's a kind of like madness that comes with grief, which is is kind of well known, that sort of irrational madness. And then at some point you realize, and for me it was about sort of 9 months after Nell died, I can't have her back. She's never going to come back. So the question now is, who am I going to become? Who am I going to become? What is my life and the life of those people I love around me going to look like? And that is the kind of challenge, I suppose. And that, for me, is where the creativity and the beauty of grief lies. And you're given this beautiful gift. You don't want the gift. You really don't want the gift. You want the old life back. But you can't have the old life back. And so you have an option as to whether to create something more and different and to evolve through the grieving process, rather than just simply yearn for the past. And you see people transforming their lives in grief, whether it's starting an incredible charity, or doing something there for their community, or becoming an incredible cook or a dancer, or creating embroideries or writing, whatever it is. You do see people making beautiful choices in it from a state of great pain. For me, that has been writing and trying to live in a more creative way. And I guess how we find that moment and how we find what our thing is, depends entirely on the individual. But I think there is real beauty. It's a terrible beauty. It's a terrible beauty. That's from Yeats, but it is a terrible beauty. But there is beauty there, and it does make you feel extraordinarily grateful for those moments. Of course, it doesn't make you feel grateful every day. The idea that you wake up and think, oh, thank goodness I'm alive today, that doesn't happen at all. But there are moments of I think extreme enlightenment that come post the death of somebody you love, which is sort of an awareness of being alive today at this moment, and that is incredibly beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that, Clover. That was really beautiful, and I hear so much courage and hope in what you say, which I think is really what people look for when they are in that moment of real darkness. They just
Mm.
need this flicker of light. Don't worry. They just need this flicker of light. I think this is what people look for. That, as Julia Samuel said, this too shall pass. I think this is really something that people need in those really dark moments. So thank you
Mm.
for sharing
Mm.
that. Clover, what would your top tips be for other women?
So don't be afraid of the truth. Don't be afraid of who you are, and do as much personal excavation as you possibly can. I think that the kind of facing the stuff that is dark, that is scary, that is the sort of least attractive, I suppose, parts, or what you might think of as least attractive. There's so much pressure on us to look a certain way, to behave a certain way. That has been massively exacerbated by social media, of course, and I've been really interested by using Instagram as a way of trying to bust through that, and to try and, like, my I as much as is possible, I try to put a sort of unfiltered version of my life up there. Obviously, it's always going to be a version of your life. It's not, it cannot be your whole life, but to kind of really shoot for the truth, I think, because in the truth, that's where a kind of liberation and a kind of creativity and a kind of possibility lies, to shed the idea that you've got to be a certain person, if that certain person isn't the person that you want to be. And I think, yeah, I think trying to be as honest as you possibly can, even when it hurts. For me, that's been the most important part of my life as a growing adult, and something that I kind of hope to lean into more, more and more as I go into the next bit of my life, as I age, as I change, as my life changes. I want to be that most true, most honest version of myself that I can.
Clover, I think you've summed it all up beautifully. Thank you so much for talking to me today. This was perfection, the perfect finish.
It's been a really lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clover.